What's going on, guys? It's Isaiah back again with another football related video today. We are here to talk about the 2026 head coaching cycle of the NFL. You know, it's always a crazy time of year. After the last week of the season, you have Black Monday, which obviously means a bunch of head coaches are going to get fired. But now we are in the aftermath of Black Monday, which means we need to see which head coaches will fill all of these coaching vacancies. So here are some of my predictions, or at least what I think are the best fits for every team that currently needs a head coach. And for the order of this video, I'm going to go by which job I think is the most enticing from best to worst for the current 8 jobs that are available, starting with number 1, the Baltimore Ravens, number 2, the Atlanta Falcons, number 3, the New York Giants, number 4, the Miami Dolphins, number 5, the Las Vegas Raiders, number 6, the Arizona Cardinals, number 7, the Tennessee Titans, and number 8, the Cleveland Browns. Now, I will mention this list could go up to 10 by the end of wildcard weekend. There are still some jobs up in the air. Mike Tomlin still is kind of a question mark, maybe in the same kind of boat that John Harbaugh was in. The Green Bay Packers, Matt LaFleur, it's been rumored that he is coaching for his job this weekend. And then, of course, you have Sean McDermott, who has been questioned throughout the media and by the fan base. If we want to fall into speculation, I think his job could also be on the line. But for right now, we're going to focus on these 8 teams. Starting out with the Baltimore Ravens, I think they should go out and hire Robert Saleh. Now, of course, Saleh is the former head coach of the New York Jets, but he got his start in San Francisco as a defensive coordinator, and he returned to that role after his little tenure with the New York Jets didn't go so well. Now, there are some people who don't think Robert Saleh is a good head coach, and I would tell you that is just incorrect. Think about the hand he was dealt with the Jets. Like, they built up that defense. Quinnen Williams, Sauce Gardner, Quincy Williams at linebacker, DJ Reed at the opposite court. They had a really good team, and there are just a bunch of other players I can name. That's the type of defense that Robert Saleh implemented, and it was one of the best in the league while he was the head coach of the New York Jets. Why Robert Saleh failed in New York was strictly politics, because they were chasing Aaron Rodgers and they were just on their hands and knees just trying to please Aaron. Pause. But they were doing everything that they could to really make Aaron Rodgers happy and fine with this situation. Most notably, I think what got Robert Saleh fired was basically the forced hiring of Nathaniel Hackett as his offensive coordinator. In Baltimore, you don't have that. They're going to give the head coach the full reins to make the decisions that he feels are the best. There's a quarterback right there in Lamar Jackson who's in his prime, MVP caliber, Super Bowl caliber quarterback that is right there for Robert Saleh. So you don't have to worry about trying to draft one or fixing the situation through free agency. You have that. You have a defense that is really fitting Robert Saleh in his personality. Kyle Hamilton, Roquan Smith at the linebacker position. D-line could use some work. Pass rusher is still an issue, but you think about all the guys that Robert Saleh had to work with both in San Francisco and New York. That shouldn't be a problem for too much longer if they do hire Robert Saleh. I think the Ravens should hire Robert Saleh because they really need to rebuild their defensive identity that was lacking the past 2 years post Mike Macdonald. You think about what it was with Macdonald at defensive coordinator. They were the best in the NFL. They were the number 1 seed in the AFC and the Super Bowl favorites going into the 2023 playoffs. And now Mike Macdonald is gone. He's doing something very similar in Seattle right now. That defense fell off a cliff. It's been mid to below average the past 2 years for Baltimore. So now that John Harbaugh's gone, you need someone who can really help establish that real Baltimore Ravens AFC North type of identity again. And I think Robert Saleh is very much up to the task. You think about all the work he did in San Francisco, most notably 2019, when they had one of the best defenses in the NFL, which led to San Francisco going to the Super Bowl that year. You think about all the work he did in New York, like I mentioned, they were led by their defense, and even though he was not successful, that defense was always one of the best in the league. You think about what he's done this year, even though San Francisco's defense has been up and down for what they've been with all their injuries, you can say Robert Saleh has done an amazing job with what he's been given to work with. So I think Baltimore, with all the pieces on that defense, can easily work with Robert Saleh. Plus, you get the added plus of him potentially bringing in an elite offensive coordinator to work with Lamar Jackson. Obviously, Todd Monken is up in the air. He's led some good Ravens offenses, like 2 years ago when Lamar won his MVP, right? We know what he can do, but if you can bring in a Mike McDaniel who can really elevate the Ravens offense from what it turned into in year 3 of Todd Monken, I think that is very enticing for Baltimore. It's something they should really pursue. So Robert Saleh would be my prediction for the Baltimore Ravens, and I think he'd be the best fit. On to the Atlanta Falcons. I'm not straying away from the popular pick here. I also believe that the Atlanta Falcons should and will hire Clint Kubiak, the offensive coordinator for the Seattle Seahawks, who has helped take the Seahawks offense to another level, really establishing the run identity and helping Sam Darnold remain as a franchise guy in the NFL. The Falcons have all the offensive pieces, right? They have a good, solid offensive line that can get better. Of course, you have the running back with Bijan Robinson, elite superstar level talent you have, and then if they do decide to bring Tyler Algier back, you have him as a good complementary number 2 piece. The quarterback situation needs to get figured out, of course. Will it be Michael Penix next year now that there's, a new GM in town? Will it be Kirk Cousins? He ended the year pretty okay for what he is now, right? They need to figure that situation out soon before they after they hire their head coach here. But you have the wide receiver in Drake London. That's your franchise guy. That's your Pro Bowl level receiver. Darnell Mooney's a solid number 2 option. Maybe they look to move off of him. And then you also have the decision to bring back Kyle Pitts. But after we saw at the tail end of 2025, I think they definitely should. So all the offensive pieces for Clint Kubiak to work with are there, specifically the running back position, like I mentioned. Clint Kubiak's offenses are always run heavy, going back to what he did in New Orleans with Alvin Kamara and how well they were working before they subsequently fell off. But you have Bijan, you have Tyler Algier to really work with a run-heavy guy like Clint Kubiak who loves to establish the run first and foremost. I think that'd be the perfect fit for Atlanta. And not to mention the defense. The defense is rising in Atlanta. No pun intended, of course, to their slogan. But you have 2 really good edge rushers who are on the come up in Jalen Walker and especially in James Pierce Jr., who's looking like a future All-Pro at defensive end. You have the safety position with Billy Bowman and Xavier Watts, and Jesse Bates is already back there. You already have an A.J. Terrell to work with. So Clint Kubiak can bring in whoever he wants at defensive coordinator. I think it should be Alden Durde, who was the former Dallas Cowboys defensive line coach. He's a Cowboys legend. Love that British accent. And, of course, he's the defensive coordinator for the Seattle Seahawks right now. So if Clint Kubiak goes anywhere, look for Durde to follow in his footsteps so he can continue climbing the coaching ladder of the NFL. But the Atlanta Falcons, Clint Kubiak should be your guy. Don't think about it twice. The New York Football Giants are yet again looking for a head coach. Now, to this day, I think Brian Daboll got unfairly treated. I know they blew a lot of games, but they really weren't his fault to me. Anyways. Predicting the next New York Football Giants head coach, I'm going to go with John Harbaugh. That's been the most rumored name right now, and I think there's really a lot of gas behind the fire, right? Because John Harbaugh, right, he spent 18 years with the Ravens, won a Super Bowl, was usually in playoff contention, right? Just that steady presence is what the New York Giants need. They need a guy who can consistently win, or at least consistently put a team in playoff contention. The New York Giants have not been that in years, and arguably for decades at this point, right? It's always been shaky. Going back to when they made a playoff appearance back in 2016, they were a good wildcard team, got bounced in the divisional round. They didn't make the playoffs again until 2022 with Brian Daboll, first-year head coach, with Daniel Jones. And then since then, they haven't even sniffed the playoffs. They have not been near playoff contention, not even a wild card spot at any point in the past 3 years. John Harbaugh had always put the Ravens in a position to succeed, and that's what I think the New York Giants need the most: stability. And for John Harbaugh, you have a very similar roster to what you had in Baltimore. Obviously, Jackson Dart is no Lamar Jackson, but a mobile quarterback with his abilities could help transcend an offense and take it to the next level. The run game is there, and it's very good when healthy. Cam Scatterbo was really coming on before he broke his foot. Tyron Tracy is a good receiving back out of the backfield. Maybe they bring back Devin Singletary, or maybe they draft another guy to complement that room. But it's a pretty solid running back for him. And I think especially Cam Scatterbo would fit the identity of what John Harbaugh could potentially bring over. And then, of course, at the wide receiver position, you have Malik Neighbors coming back from a torn ACL. He'll be all right. He'll still be the superstar talent that he is. You think about all the years that John Harbaugh spent with Baltimore, he has never had a wide receiver like Malik Neighbors. I think that the name that comes closest would be Anquan Boldin for the 1 year he had him with Baltimore, and they won the Super Bowl with Anquan Boldin. So I think he'd be more than happy to work with an elite talent like Malik Neighbors. You have Theo Johnson at tight end. Offensive line yet again shaky. that's been an issue for the Ravens for like the past 5 years now. So hopefully Harbaugh would get that fixed with Joe Shane at GM. But of course, the defense has a lot of great pieces too. Dexter Lawrence, Sexy Dexy. He has a little celebration there. Like we know he's one of the elite defensive players in the NFL. The D line is coming along. Abdul Carter, hopefully he'll be better in year two. Kayvon Thibodeau, they have to make a decision there. But you have a lot of really good pieces on that front seven that I think a lot of coaches are really interested in working with. It was a very disappointing unit because it was supposed to be one of the best in the NFL. I didn't even mention Brian Burns. It just slipped my mind. Brian Burns, one of the best pass rushers in the NFL. Just in case y'all thought I didn't know ball. I know, trust me. But yeah, that's a very enticing group for the Ravens. Sorry, for the Giants to offer a head coach because it's unlike a lot of these other teams and why I have them so high on the most intriguing spots to coach next year. Now, I don't know if John Harbaugh can help the Giants take the leap to beat the Eagles and possibly Dallas next year and then the Commanders, but it will help them take the next step in becoming a consistent franchise again, and that's what I think is most important here. Next, the Miami Dolphins, who just recently fired Mike McDaniel last Wednesday. It wasn't a very surprising firing, but it was late, so it caught a lot of people off guard. But this is a very intriguing spot for a lot of coaches because you have some offensive talent to work with here, and you have some good defensive players as well for the Dolphins. But who should be the next Dolphins head coach? Well, it's going to be another Michigan man for Stephen Ross, and it's going to be Jesse Minter, the defensive coordinator for the Los Angeles Chargers. The Dolphins' biggest flaw under Mike McDaniel was that they were not good in cold weather games, most notably against the Chiefs in their Super Bowl run in 2023. That wild card game, it was one of the coldest playoff games ever, and the Miami Dolphins offense, which was the identity of the team, could not do anything in the frigid cold. And it wasn't just that game, like I mentioned, it was really across the couple seasons they had Mike McDaniel going back to 2022 when they got off to that hot start. They fell out of the playoffs late in the year. 2023, they were contending for one of the top 4 seeds in the AFC before falling off and losing the division to the Bills late in the season. Those Mike McDaniel offenses were really falling off in cold weather games. But then you bring in a guy like Jesse Minter, who is coming in from the Jim Harbaugh system, both from Michigan and with the Los Angeles Chargers, whose identity is running the football and stopping the run. I think the Miami Dolphins really need a complete rebrand of their team, really establish some smash mouth football in the AFC here, because you have to compete with now the Buffalo Bills, of course, with Josh Allen and James Cook, but now for years you have to compete with Drake May and Travion Henderson. So you really need an elite defense to go up against those teams, and I think Jesse Minter could bring that for the Miami Dolphins. And Minter now has the ability to bring in whatever quarterback he wants, whether it be from this year's draft or the next couple drafts, or maybe a veteran quarterback he likes to work with here. But he can bring in a quarterback he likes because Tua, most likely or not, will not be a Miami Dolphin next year, whether that be via trade or he's cut or maybe he's just the backup of the team, but he won't be there. You also have a Devon Achane who you can work with to really establish the run game. Think about how successful the Chargers run game this year with all the injuries was with Kamani Vidal and Omarion Hampton, right? That's a really good stepping stone for Jesse Minter, if you ask me. You have Jalen Waddle who you can work with. Maybe they keep Tyreek Hill. I really doubt it at this point just because of his age and his contract, but maybe you keep Tyreek Hill on your roster here, but you have some really good defensive pieces to work with here. You already have a defensive captain back there in Micah Fitzpatrick, who is very comparable to Derwin James, the Chargers defensive captain who Minter was just working with. So there's a lot of work to be done in Miami, but it's still a very intriguing job that I think Jesse Minter, like I mentioned, a former Michigan man, would be very, very drawn to. And like I mentioned, Stephen Ross, who is one of the most infamous owners in the NFL at this point because of all the scandals and stuff like that, but he is a Michigan alumni. He's a Michigan donor as well. I think he would love to bring in a former Jim Harbaugh guy, and he tried to hire Jim Harbaugh a couple years ago, so why not get the next best thing? If it's not his brother, who I have going to the New York Giants, then why not bring in his really his head coaching protege for the past 2 years? Next up, the Las Vegas Raiders. Now, they offer a really intriguing spot because they were a mess under Pete Carroll this year. He was one and done with the Raiders, but they now hold the number 1 overall pick in the draft. And which coach should control the future of Fernando Mendoza and the Las Vegas Raiders? I think that should be the recently fired Kevin Stefanski. Now, Kevin Stefanski to me is not a bad head coach whatsoever, and even though I am a Shador supporter, right, and I was really against what he was doing with Dylan Gabriel and Shador during the season, his track record speaks for itself because when the Browns were successful, it really came under the worst situations, especially after the Baker Mayfield and Deshaun Watson stuff. Deshaun Watson is terrible, then he tears his Achilles, and in comes Joe Flacco off the couch, who Kevin Stefanski worked with instantly and kept the Browns in playoff contention. They won 11 games with a geriatric Joe Flacco just 2 years ago. Obviously, the Deshaun Watson situation really cost Kevin Stefanski his job because Deshaun Watson missed so many games with both suspension and the Achilles injury. It really prevented from Stefanski from really working with quarterback stability, which is really important for an offensive coach like Stefanski. If you compare that to what Kyle Shanahan had to go through, right? At least he got some good years with Jimmy Garoppolo. You had that stability if Trey Lance didn't work out. And then you also were gifted Brock Purdy. And obviously that's now working out. He is their guy. He's the franchise quarterback. In Cleveland, it just wasn't the same. You had Baker Mayfield, who was really good in year one with Kevin Stefanski. They won a playoff game in Kevin Stefanski's first year. But then he goes through his shoulder injuries and he isn't the same in year two. And they're kind of forced to move off of him because of that fifth-year option that they declined. They had to trade him. And then you bring in Deshaun Watson. That's not a Kevin Stefanski move. That's an ownership move. Ownership made that move. Of course, Kevin Stefanski had to give the okay, but really he had no choice in the matter. It was Deshaun Watson or it was nothing. So you give Deshaun Watson all that guaranteed money and then he gets hurt in the suspension that was looming, right? That's not really great for Kevin Stefanski. And then you go into a draft where they pick up two different quarterbacks, right? And you kind of have your guy, but there's also the guy who the owner likes, and also the GM likes, so maybe you have to work with him as well. But you also recently signed Joe Flacco again, Kenny Pickett, who you just traded for, and then I believe they also had Tyler Huntley on the roster. So 5 different quarterbacks to work with this year. Just a lot for Kevin Stefanski. I'm kind of ranting on at this point, but it was a lot to work with that I think any head coach would struggle with. But when you think about the biggest issues for the Las Vegas Raiders this year, to me, they're all on offense because the defense is very solid. Specifically, Max Crosby. He's Max Crosby, man. He's elite. He's one of my favorite players to watch. But the Raiders' struggles were all on offense, and they were in 3 areas that Kevin Stefanski really had a lot of success with in Cleveland. That was the offensive line, that was the run game in general, and that was the quarterback play. I think Kevin Stefanski can really go in and fix that in a year or two, right? It may take a while, but it may also take a very short amount of time. You have the number 1 overall pick, and you can pick your pick of the quarterbacks here. Most likely, it's going to be Fernando Mendoza from Indiana, the Heisman Trophy winner, the pocket quarterback, the Matt Ryan clone, people are calling him. I think Kevin Stefanski would love to work with him because I think that's the best fit. Or maybe you take a Dante Moore, right, who has some of your mobile abilities and could potentially work as a superstar level quarterback because he has a lot of those traits. It's not just Stefanski if he gets the job, but there are a lot of pieces to work with around the quarterback as well. You have Ashton Jency, who you just drafted. That's your franchise guy, your first round pick. Get him an offensive line with all the $60 million in cap space that they have to work with, and then they can establish a run game again in Las Vegas. They have not had not even elite, just a good run game since Josh Jacobs in 2022 when he led the league in rushing. And then, of course, for your receivers, right? You already have Brock Bowers, right? All-pro tight end. We know how great he is. You have Michael Mayer, who I think they'll need to make a decision on because I think he's too good to just be playing in this, this heavy 12 personnel package. But we've seen Kevin Stefanski loves to use his tight ends. So Brock Bowers and Michael Mayer really provide an intriguing option for Kevin Stefanski if this is a job that he wants to pursue. Then on the outside, you still have your question marks here, but there are some solid players to work with. I think Jack Beck, who they just drafted, will need to get a lot more PT to prove that he can be a starting level wide receiver in the NFL, but you have him to work with. Dante Thornton has been up and down, but he's a really athletic wide receiver that the Raiders drafted in the 3rd round that he could potentially work with here as a nice complementary piece. And then, of course, like I mentioned, $60 million in cap space. So you can go out and get a lot of receivers or just a lot of help in general to help out whoever you draft number 1 overall. And for the Raiders, Kevin Stefanski would be a great fit. culture fit. I think he would work very well with Tom Brady, right? Former QBs working together, right? Really building the vision of what they think the Raiders' offense could be. And then you have the established defense. Whether or not Kevin Stefanski brings in his own guy, I think it's yet to be seen if Jim Schwartz will leave Cleveland, right? He's the defensive coordinator for the Browns. He worked with Myles Garrett. I think he'd love to work with Max Crosby. We'll see. Maybe Patrick Graham ends up staying. He's survived two different head coaching cycles already. Why not make it a third? And he has an interview with the Commanders as of the making of this video, and he's provided a really good defense for the Raiders for the past couple years. So I think he has a chance to stay. But whoever they hire at DC, they have a good defense. And then if Kevin Stefanski were to take this job, I think he could take the Raiders to the next level because he'd be the best coach they've had in years. Even John Gruden. I think he'd be better than John Gruden, if you're asking me. Number 60, Arizona Cardinals. Now, Jonathan Gannon was fired from the Cardinals after it seemed like he was going to stay, right? And granted, Jonathan Gannon deserved to be fired because I think he let the situation kind of crumble around him. But at the same time, who else wouldn't go 3-14 with the roster, right? They started out 2-2. It was like your average Jonathan Gannon Arizona Cardinals start, right? Kind of mid, just not taking the next step, but they're not bad enough to be like one of the worst teams in the NFL. Then they just only won one game. It was really bad. It was just really bad. The defense fell off a cliff. That was supposed to be Gannon's specialty coming from Philadelphia as their defensive coordinator back in the 2023 Super Bowl run. And then, of course, Kyler Murray just had the worst year of his career and then went down with a mysterious foot injury, aka benching, in favor of Jacoby Brissett, who really led a more efficient offense, especially if you had fantasy football. Everybody knows how great Jacoby Brissett was for fantasy managers, but everything fell apart for the Cardinals this year, and I think it's really led to this really hardcore rebuild that I think they're about to endure. You have some of the pieces here. You still have to work with Marvin Harrison Jr., see what he can be in year 3. It seemed like he was kind of taking the next step. The game against my Cowboys, right? He had that breakout and he had the little, like the nastiest route you've ever seen on DeRon Bland. Made him hit the nay mid-game. It's disgusting route to this day, but you have him to work with. Got to make a decision on Michael Wilson. Obviously, he had a breakout campaign at the end of this season. He was really good, and I think we could see him become a Pro Bowler if he gets a shot with injuries and all that. After all the reserves are announced. But Michael Wilson for Pro Bowl 2026, write it down. Then, of course, Trey McBride, the best tight end in football right now. I know George Kittle's still playing, he's still hooping, but it's Trey McBride. He's the best. You have a lot of pieces to work with. So who is the best coach to bring in with all these pieces? Well, the name will shock you. And I think one coaching cycle every year will have at least one name that is shocking to the masses. Last year, that name was Pete Carroll. Came out of nowhere. This year, I think that name will be Thomas Brown. He is currently understaffed as the QB coach for the New England Patriots, and I think he'll be a head coach in the near future, if not right now, for the Arizona Cardinals. Now, I made a mistake here. He's the tight ends coach slash passing games coordinator for the New England Patriots. Now, I think this will be a shocking name to hear on the coaching cycle. I have no sources or anything like that. I have no intel, but I think he'll be a name that surprises a lot of people in this cycle because he has been up for head coaching jobs in the past, and the job that he's helped do in New England this year will, I think, give him a leg up in this year's cycle. Little background on Thomas Brown. He's been an offensive coordinator in the past. Now, granted, for some bad teams, but that's not his fault, right? Most recently, the Chicago Bears offensive coordinator. Bears fans are very familiar with him. He took over from Matt Eberflus when he was fired, and the Bears had a little bit of success when Thomas Brown was the head coach of the Bears, or at least the interim head coach. And then he was also the offensive coordinator for the Carolina Panthers during the Frank Reich era. And he also had a little bit of success while he was the head coach after Frank Reich got fired midway in year 2. Now, of course, it will take a lot for Thomas Brown to get hired here, but here are some reasons why I think the Cardinals can at least consider him and why I think he'd be a perfect fit for the job. He's really going to bring a rushing identity back to the Cardinals. That's what they really want to do. They wanted to run the football, but they just couldn't. After James Conner went down and Trey Benson went down, they were really stuck with nothing in the run game. Thomas Brown came from Chicago, where he helped Justin Fields reach 1,000 yards as a quarterback. One of the only quarterbacks to do that in NFL history. During his tenure with the Carolina Panthers, he helped Chuba Hubbard get paid. Yes, Chuba Hubbard was on his way to being a 1,000-yard rusher a lot because of how successful Thomas Brown was at offensive coordinator and the run game, right? For everything that Bryce Young wasn't in his rookie year, something that was there was the success of Chuba Hubbard in the second half of the year when Thomas Brown really took the full reins in Carolina. Now, with the Arizona Cardinals, right, that's what they are looking for. It was too much passing the ball, way too much, because they would get stuffed on first and second down. Jacoby Brissett would throw an incompletion, bang, three and out. And once they were down at least 20 or 30 points late in the fourth quarter, that's when the offense started to come alive. With Thomas Brown, I think he can bring an identity to really control the line of scrimmage again in Arizona and make them a dominant run team again. A lot like what they were under Bruce Arians. Now, I know he wasn't known for that in Tampa Bay, but when they were, when Bruce Arians was the head coach in Arizona, they were known for running the football, and they were a good team running the ball, and it helped Carson Palmer have one of the best years of his career in a real, late career resurgence. I think the same thing could happen in Arizona. Now, the biggest question mark is who's going to play quarterback. That's yet to be determined, and I think that's for Thomas Brown hypothetically to figure out. But I think he'll make the right choice. Again, you think about everything that the New England Patriots were this year, especially through the air with Drake May. Thomas Brown was a big part of that. Yes, it's Mike Vrabel in his first year. Yes, it's Josh McDaniels being one of the better offensive coordinators in the league. But Thomas Brown has played a big role in this offense, and I think he'll get his opportunity in Arizona, if that does happen. Number 7, the Tennessee Titans. Now, they could go a lot of different ways here. They just had an offensive-minded coach in Brian Callahan, and while that flopped, right, they could go the same direction again because you have Cam Ward, the guy you just spent the number 1 overall pick on. Now, obviously, Brian Callahan thought he was going to be working with Will Levis, but now you have Cam Ward, who really brings a lot to the table talent-wise and is really one of the better raw talents at quarterback in the league, if you ask me. So who's the best coach to fit with here? I know Mike McDaniel was just mentioned as a potential name here, but I'm thinking of a different Mike. I'm thinking of Big Mike, Mike McCarthy should be the next head coach for the Tennessee Titans. And I mean, the track record is there for everything that Mike McCarthy, brings to the table, flaws wise, like his late game decisions and maybe some situational play calling here. What he's done with quarterbacks in the past cannot be understated. Most notably with Aaron Rodgers, helping him really reach his full potential in Green Bay. Aaron Rodgers does not become Aaron Rodgers without Mike McCarthy. And I think Aaron Rodgers could probably tell you the same thing, right? Obviously, in year 3 of Aaron Rodgers starting as a quarterback, they go all the way to the Super Bowl, and then the next year, Aaron Rodgers wins his first MVP as the Packers go 15-1 that year. You fast forward all the way past to his tenure with the Dallas Cowboys. Dak Prescott really turned into one of the league's elite pocket quarterbacks under Mike McCarthy. That did not happen with Jason Garrett. Dak Prescott changed his entire style because of what Mike McCarthy helped implement. It was like the 2-3 step drop, get the ball out quick, don't even think about it. If he's open, you throw it. That has helped Dak Prescott immensely, and why he has really turned into an MVP caliber quarterback the past 3 years here. I think he could easily do the same thing with Cam Ward, who unfortunately had to do a lot of thinking in the pocket because just how bad the Titans offense was, from the offensive line, specifically the tackle position, to the run game that didn't come alive till late in the season, and then just the wide receiver report that's still building, but it's just not there at the moment. I think Mike McCarthy could do wonders with Cam Ward as the head coach. And Mike McCarthy is really a culture builder. Like I mentioned with Green Bay, he had instant success with the Green Bay Packers, with Dallas, 3 straight 12-5 seasons, and while that sadly did not end in a Super Bowl appearance, it led to consistency, and playoff appearances were expected, right? It was no longer the goal, it was the expectation. For Tennessee, you had a coach like that in Mike Vrabel. They let him go because of politics, but now you can have that again with Mike McCarthy. I think he could really bring that winning mentality back in Tennessee that's been missing for the past couple of years here. And there are some really good pieces to work with here. Obviously, you have Cam Ward, like I just mentioned, the number 1 overall pick. The running back room, I think it's TBD at the moment just because Tony Pollard's older, right? And he was a trade deadline candidate. But Tyjae Spears is also a really nice change of pace back that I think can be really good in a very good offense. Kind of think about what Tony Pollard was with Mike McCarthy back in 2022 when he had his breakout season. Think about what that running back room could be when they're reunited again. That's all I'm saying. Wide receiver room definitely has to get solved. They need a true number one wide receiver because Calvin Ridley's not that guy. But Chimere DK, who is probably going to be an all pro as a rookie for his special teams abilities, right? But he is a really nice piece in the slot. Outside, you have Alec Manor, who has had some really nice moments at tight end. You have two pretty solid tight ends here. And obviously Chico Conquo, who I think they'll have to make a decision on. And then Gunnar Helm in year two. I think he'll be a really important piece for the future. You think about the success Mike McCarthy has had with tight ends in the past. Your Michael Finley back in Green Bay, Martellus Bennett for a little bit. You also had Jake Ferguson in Dallas, Dalton Schultz in Dallas. Tight ends are really important to Mike McCarthy offenses, and I think those two could be really big names if he is brought on as the head coach. On defense, you already have your established guy in Jeffrey Simmons, right? That's your guy. They chose not to trade him because they thought he was the leader of the team. Good decision, in my opinion, because if you didn't have Jeffrey Simmons, and this was going to be a really hard sell for a lot of coaches, but he's there. The Titans have an early draft pick that they can use on another good defensive piece, potentially. A Ruben Bain or an Arvell Reese would be available to them in the top five here. A lot of things are looking up for Tennessee. It's going to take a lot of roster building, but I think Mike McCarthy is more than up to the task and really leading this rebuild, kind of like what he did rebuilding the Dallas Cowboys from 2020 to 2021 and so forth. And at last, I have the Cleveland Browns, what was once a really up-and-coming team under Baker Mayfield and Kevin Stefanski, has fallen apart, right? They're back to the Cleveland Browns of old, right? Back to where they belong at the bottom. Who should come and coach this team to bring them back up? I think it should be a name that everyone is going to expect to get another chance at being a head coach in the NFL again, and Brian Flores. Last time Brian Flores was a head coach, it was obviously controversial for a lot of reasons. Very similar to what Cleveland went through. Brian Flores had a quarterback that he did not want. He did not want to draft Tua Tagovailoa. He wanted to draft Justin Herbert. And he also lost out on the opportunity to draft Joe Burrow number one overall. So you have a quarterback he doesn't want to work with, right? And he had a lot of success in Miami, but according to Brian Flores in his lawsuit with the NFL, he states that he was paid to not rig games, but throw games in order to tank. Now, Brian Flores, right, whether you can argue it's politics or not, right, I think we can at least somewhat agree that he wasn't given at least a fair shake in his first tenure as a Dolphins head coach. You go to Cleveland, though, obviously you have the established superstar who just broke the sack record with Myles Garrett, probably the best NFL player pound for pound in the NFL, probably the best player of the decade, if you ask me. You have that to work with, right? And you have a lot of really good defensive pieces after a really good draft by the GM, right? Mason Graham at your nose tackle, Carson Schwessinger, who was one of my favorite prospects of the NFL draft. I think he has a lot of all-pro talent at linebacker. You have him to work with. Denzel Ward on the outside. Just a lot of elite Pro Bowl, maybe all-pro level names to work with in Cleveland that would really fit Brian Flores. The quarterback situation is still up in the air, like I mentioned with Kevin Stefanski, because it was just a mess. But Brian Flores could bring in one of his guys at quarterback if he was given the chance by Andrew Berry, and that could help bring the Browns, back to a level of not elite play, but at least playoff contention again. Because Brian Flores to me is that coach. Remember what he did in Miami from year one to year two. They went from 5-11 in a 5-game win streak at the end of his first year to almost making the playoffs at 9-8, and then almost doing it again in the alleged year that the Dolphins were saying, "Hey, Brian Flores, we need you to tank." There's a lot of stuff that Brian Flores has to work with here, and he's, to me, a proven head coach if you're asking me. I think he would work wonders in Cleveland. Now, obviously, to entice a Brian Flores to leave Minnesota, a really good situation with a great head coach, to entice him to leave Minnesota and that job that he's done over there is going to take a lot. But like I mentioned, you have Myles Garrett already, a lot of good defensive pieces. What they really need to get down, though, is the quarterback. Like I mentioned, Brian Flores, I think he needs the ability to bring in his own quarterback, Andrew Berry. Just let him pick. If you're in a meeting room with Brian Flores and you're saying, okay, this is our quarterback situation, one thing you need to say is you can pick out your guy. Because the guy that Brian Flores wanted to pick out was the right choice. I remember that all the lunchroom discussions I had with my friends back in 2020 during the draft, I was team Justin Herbert over Tua, and so was Brian Flores. And so far throughout their careers, Brian Flores was right. It should have been Justin Herbert. So let him make the decision, or at least be a big factor in making the decision for the quarterback in 2026. Do not leave him with the same mess that Kevin Stefanski had. Don't let him inherit that. Let him make his own decision and watch the Cleveland Browns go back to relevancy like they were just a short couple years ago. All right, y'all, that's the end of the video. Let me know what y'all think of my predictions and best fits for all these head coaching positions. Now, like I mentioned, there are still some jobs that are potentially on the line here in the playoffs, so this number could grow. Some names I didn't mention: Matt LaFleur. I think he would be a hot coaching candidate that a lot of these teams could wait for if he does get bounced out of the playoffs, specifically the Atlanta Falcons. He has history. That's where he came up from under the Kyle Shanahan system, was the offensive coordinator for a little bit there. That's how we got the Green Bay job. I think he'd be a perfect fit for the Atlanta Falcons. So sleeper names I will mention as well. Like I said, there's always some surprise names that no one sees coming, but I think we should watch out for. Clayton Adams, the offensive coordinator for the Dallas Cowboys right now, has really helped establish an elite run game in Dallas, and I think he's a future head coach in the NFL. Watch out for him. Anthony Campanelli, the defensive coordinator for the Jacksonville Jaguars, has really done an amazing job. They have the number one run defense in the NFL in just his first year as a defensive coordinator. Watch out for him as a hot defensive coaching prospect. Josh McCown, who has had coaching interviews in the past and who has been the QB coach / offensive coordinator for the Minnesota Vikings for the past 2 years here. We've seen the job he's done with a guy like Sam Darnold, and it's still a work in progress with J.J. McCarthy, but at least he's built at least some sort of a track record to really help bring up his head coaching resume, because it was low when he first interviewed for the job in Houston back in 2021. I think he could potentially get a job in the next couple of years here. And then one last name I want to mention: Davis Webb. That name is very familiar to you. This is another backup quarterback who Sean Payton loves. Sean Payton loves Davis Webb, and I think we could easily see him be a future head coach as well, as sort of another offensive-minded young head coaching prospect that a lot of teams seemingly want to get their hands on. But thank you so much for joining. More videos on the way, and I'll see y'all next time.